Welcome to First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, the birthplace of Congregational Humanism. We carry on that tradition of free thought today, dedicated to promoting a free search for truth, meaning, and justice. Our web address is firstunitarian.org. I'm David Breeden, Senior Minister. Welcome.
In the past month, I have been in a couple of meetings, a board meeting in one case, a staff meeting in another case. In both cases, I called out a perceived injustice at the meeting. It was uncomfortable. And as I pictured myself as something like a disruptor of the status quo, I realized later that I might have just been a jerk. There's some hard truth in what I am thinking about today, about what it means to call in versus calling out. You may know something about calling out culture. When we see something or we hear something, and certainly it happens a lot in social media, and oh, that person said that thing and I'm going to call it out. I'm good at that. Good at that part. The calling in is harder. The calling in is about relationship, being in deeper and deeper and more loving relationship. I came to understand in my internship for ministry that it was all relationship all the time. Golly, that's tiring. So I want to spend a little time delving into what it means to be in a covenantal community, what we mean by being in covenant, what it means to call in versus calling out, the uses of each of those things, and how we might live more fully into the relationships we create. I realized as I reflected on this that in those couple of meetings that I was talking about, that it wasn't just that I was upset in that moment, but that I am anxious and angry about all the things. I am anxious and angry about all that's happening in the world. I know how to behave. I know how to be nice. I know how to be Minnesota nice. Even though I wasn't born here, I do. I know what's expected of me. What I don't always know is how to be artful and generous in a setting. And so maybe it's not about being heroic and it's not about being a jerk. And maybe it's a little bit of both. Maybe it's about learning forward and being generous with myself as I try to be generous with others as we do this work. To be in a covenantal community versus a creedal community is different than many other, not all other, but many other Protestant religious traditions and different from Catholicism. Some of us come out of religious traditions in which we said a creed on Sunday morning. Everybody stood up and they said the creed, maybe the Nicene Creed or the Apostles' Creed. We believe, we affirm, right? And everybody who stands up and says it is part of the in-group. It's pretty basic, and I don't want to take anything away from people who find comfort in that, to repeat the words each week that identify you as part of a faith community. That's incredibly powerful for some people. We do something different. We stand up each week and say, this is how we will behave with each other. How we behave with each other and in the world is more important than what we say we believe. So there are those among us in this room, certainly, who are atheists, who are agnostics, who follow a Buddhist path, who hark back to their Jewish roots, who are theists or neo-pagans. Probably only a sprinkling of you out there. But we're not all the same in our belief, nor are we called to be all the same in our belief. We are called to act in the ways of love. Love is the spirit of this place, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Those are not about belief. Those are about how we will be together. Covenants we don't see a whole lot of covenants in the normal parlance of the world and our going about things. You think of a marriage as a covenant, the words the vows that a couple says to each other, those are covenantal languages. Here's the thing about covenants. They have three characteristics. You have to enter into them willingly, without coercion. You aspire to faithfulness and commitment to the truth, and you avoid the pursuit of behaviors that diminish it. In other words, you act in good faith, and you assume that your partners in covenant act in good faith. And they call for non-retaliation and a commitment to attempt to heal any broken places by a spirit of generosity. That's what I want to circle back around to when we talk about calling in. What does it mean to be in long-lasting relationships so that we call each other back into covenant? So, in a covenantal community, I have an expectation of grace. I have an expectation that you will be generous with me, and I have an expectation that I will be generous with you. And sometimes I fall short of that goal. I was thinking about this. What does grace mean for humanists? I want to not think about God's grace for a bit as Christians think about God's grace, that giving, that forgiving of God. For the ancient Romans, gratia had three distinct meanings: a pleasing quality. That person is graceful as they move through the world. Favor or goodwill. That's the one I'm talking about. This expectation of grace is an expectation of goodwill. And gratitude or thanks. When we say grace at a meal, it doesn't have to be to a deity that we're saying grace. We can be grateful. We can say thanks and express gratitude. We find all three of these in modern day English, right? So hold on to that thought of grace a little bit. Grace and covenant. I want to hold over here a little bit. So Greta Thunberg, wow. Greta Thunberg this week called out the nations of the world. She called us out with the intent to shame us into action, right? She doesn't have a covenant with all of us. She wasn't worried about our feelings. No, she wanted to pierce us with the way she spoke. Her covenant, she was calling us on our decency as human beings, our most basic human need for self-preservation for generations to come. Her speech, her "how dare you" speech to the UN climate conference was a prime example of call-out culture. This will not stand. She's been known to say, I don't want your applause. I don't want you to look at me as hope. I want you to believe the science and do something. She's been criticized for not being nice. You know, like girls and women, or in particular, are socialized to be nice. We all are in this culture, but it falls especially strongly on girls and women to be nice. That's one reason her speech was so moving, is that she broke with all the conventions. She said enough is enough. And to be sure, there are a number of young climate activists, young women of color, who are also speaking out. I would be remiss if I didn't say that this young white woman from Northern Europe is getting a lot of attention when there have been a number of young women of color from other countries who are speaking out as vociferously. It is surely, surely a time for calling out. Calling out takes courage, but not always compassion. Calling in requires compassion and curiosity. When we disrupt the status quo, we disrupt the expectation of niceness. And when we call in, we lean into more love, to greater accountability, to more authentic relationship. Calling out, if you're in the presence of an overtly bigoted remark, a racist remark, a sexist joke, someone who is expounding on why everyone else is lesser than they are. Calling out might be to say, nope, ouch, wow, I need you to stop right there. I need to push back on that. I disagree. I don't see it that way. I'm having a strong reaction to that, and I need to tell you why. I don't find that funny. Can you tell me why you think that's funny? I don't find that funny. Can you tell me why you think that's funny? I want you to go home and practice those words. None of these statements are hateful or derogatory, but they are meant to stop harmful behavior in its tracks. Calling out is appropriate when we need to let someone know that their words or actions are unacceptable and will not be tolerated. It will likely feel hard and uncomfortable, but it's necessary. It's good to practice in advance. Remember, it's a powerful thing for a target of oppression to hear those words from the mouth of an accomplice. Calling in may sound like this. I'm curious, what was your intention when you said that? How might someone else see that differently? Is it possible that someone might interpret your actions differently? How might someone else interpret those actions? How might the impact of your words or your actions differ from your intent? What would other stakeholders think or feel or say? How might we call out behavior while calling in people? Oh my gosh, it's so much harder. It's so much harder to call in. I just want to get mad. I just want to get mad and say, stop it. And in some cases, that's appropriate. But if I'm going to remain in relationship with you, and you're going to remain in relationship with me and with each other, we have to call each other into greater accountability and take the time to cultivate that. We can practice calling in when there's an opportunity to explore deeper, to make meaning together, and find a mutual sense of understanding across difference. When we want to imagine different perspectives, the possibility of different outcomes. When we're able to focus on reflection rather than reaction. That's what I've got to work on. Trying to be reflective rather than reactive. And that is not to say that the way we've always done it is the way it should always be done. Right? Calling each other in calls us to look more deeply at the way we do things and how it might be perceived. Not because we want to look good, but because we want to live with more integrity. That's what this humanism calls us to live with greater authenticity and integrity. Loretta Ross is the founder of the reproductive justice movement. She's a human rights activist and university professor. She wrote, Loretta Ross is an African-American woman, 71 years old, and she was a firebrand back in the day and today too. She says, I too have been called out, usually for a prejudice I had against someone or for using insensitive language that didn't keep up with rapidly changing conventions. That's a part of everyone's learning curve, but I still felt hurt, embarrassed, and defensive. Fortunately, patient elders helped me grow through my discomfort and appreciate that context and intentions and nuances matter. Colleagues helped me to understand that I experienced things through my trauma. There was a difference between what I felt was true and what were facts. This ain't easy, and it ain't over, even as I am now an elder myself. She continues, call-outs make people fearful of being targeted. People avoid meaningful conversations when hyper-vigilant perfectionists point out apparent mistakes, feeding the cannibalistic maw of the cancel culture. Shaming people for when they woke up presupposes rigid political standards for acceptable discourse and enlists others to pile on. Sometimes it's just ruthless hazing. She says we can change this culture. Calling in is simply a call out done with love. Some corrections can be made privately. Others will necessarily be public, but done with respect. It is not tone policing, protecting white fragility, or covering up abuse. It helps avoid the weaponization of suffering that prevents constructive healing. Close quote. Some of you have told me, you've come to me and told me of times that you felt like you wanted to say something and you couldn't quite. It couldn't quite come out because you were afraid of making a mistake. Because, my goodness, if we're going to be involved in the social justice work of the world, we're surely going to make mistakes. Some of you have come to me and said, I said this thing and it felt good, but I'm not sure it was the right thing. I tell you this to tell you, I'm so glad you came to me to talk about it. That's the thing to do a thing, to say a thing, and then process it with somebody else. It doesn't have to be me. You can talk about it amongst yourselves. There's this thing that was happening at my office, this thing that was happening at the gym, this thing that was happening at my school, in my bridge club, in my book club. People saying a thing, and I wanted to respond and I didn't know how. Something to ask in advance is, what is my relationship with the person I would speak to? Do I want to call them out, or do I want to call them in? Do I want to call them in to greater, deeper relationships? How do I want to own my part? I want to take a moment to introduce, in a new way, Felicia Philibert. Felicia is known to us in our congregation as someone who has been a long time dedicated carer for our youngest ones. Felicia's worked in the nursery for 5 years? About 5 years. Much beloved. You've seen a whole half a generation of kids come through. Now Felicia is a senior in social work at Augsburg College, and she is doing a year-long, her academic year-long social work internship here with us at FUS this year. She's an organizational development intern. She's helping us look at our structures of diversity and inclusion and equity. What are the ways we can uncover how inclusive we are? What does equity look like? And how can we make our structures of equity more explicit? It's not about showing what we do wrong. It's about showing where the strengths and the growing edges are. I've been thinking about this. Felicia and I are working together, and it's not like she's a house inspector, right? The house inspector goes in and says, whoa, you got some problems there. Up in the roof, you're going to need to fix that. It's not so much about that, I think, though there may be a part of it. But it's about what are the strengths of the relationships? What is the strength of our covenant? And how can we call each other into greater authenticity and integrity? Two things I love and find incredibly challenging about congregational life. It's all relationships all the time. And we are practicing in here how we want society to be out in the rest of the world. We are trying to build something and practice in here and make mistakes in here and call each other into greater relationship in here so that we can do that out in the world. At least that's how I see it. Felicia read for us this beautiful reading today by Teresa Soto. She's a UU minister in Oakland. She's a woman of color. She's a woman who lives her life in a wheelchair, and she is badass. Excuse me. Teresa, I hope you're listening. You're badass. She writes, in this community, we hold hope close. We don't always know what comes next, but that cannot dissuade us. We don't always know just what to do, but that will not mean that we are lost in the wilderness. We rely on the certainty beneath the foundation of our values and ethics. We are people who return to love like a North Star and to the truth that we are greater together than we are alone. Our hope does not live in some glimmer of an indistinct future. Rather, we know the way to the world of which we dream. And by covenant and the movement forward of one right action and the next and the next and the next, we know that one day we will arrive at home.
Thanks for listening. You can find much more about humanism and what's happening at First Unitarian Society in Minneapolis by visiting our website at firstunitarian.org.